Welcome to the AskJunior Daily Judgment podcast. I'm Priya Sharma, and joining me today is Arjun Gupta.
Hello, everyone. We're diving into a fascinating case today that deals with the very important topic of fairness in public employment recruitment. But before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast if you enjoy our daily legal breakdowns.
That's right. Your support helps us reach more listeners and continue providing in-depth analysis of the latest court decisions. Now, let's get started with today's case, Tej Prakash Pathak versus Rajasthan High Court.
This case comes from the Supreme Court of India, and it revolves around a dispute over the recruitment process for the position of translator in the Rajasthan High Court.
Let's break down the key facts, Arjun.
In 2009, the Rajasthan High Court issued a notification inviting applications for 13 translator positions. The notification specified that only judicial assistants and junior judicial assistants with at least 3 years of experience in the High Court and a master's degree in English literature could apply.
So we're talking about a specialized position requiring both experience and specific academic qualifications.
Exactly. And the notification also mentioned that a preference would be given to law graduates. Now, the key point here is that the recruitment was governed by the Rajasthan High Court Staff Service Rules 2002, framed under Article 229(2) of the Indian Constitution. This means that the recruitment process had to adhere to specific rules and procedures laid out by the state.
So the initial selection criteria were pretty clear, but what happened next?
An exam was held in December 2009, with 21 candidates appearing. However, when the results were announced in February 2010, only 3 candidates were declared successful. Why? Because the Chief Justice of the High Court decided, after the exam, that only candidates scoring a minimum of 75% marks would be considered for selection. This decision was challenged by unsuccessful candidates in the High Court.
And the core of their argument was that the High Court had essentially changed the rules of the game after it had been played.
Exactly, Priya. They argued that fixing the cutoff at 75% after the examination was a violation of their rights and amounted to unfair treatment.
This case highlights a crucial legal issue: the extent to which selection procedures can be modified during the recruitment process. Let's delve into the legal questions involved.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court had to address several critical questions.
Let's start with the most fundamental question. Could the High Court change the selection criteria after the recruitment process had begun?
This is a complex issue. The Supreme Court had to determine whether the principle of not changing the rules of the game in the middle applies to both eligibility criteria and selection procedures. And it's a matter of balancing the right to a fair recruitment process for all candidates with the need for the recruiting body to ensure the suitability of candidates for the job.
This is where the concept of ratio decidendi comes in. It's the principle of law on which the decision of the court is based. What did the Supreme Court say about this issue?
The Supreme Court, in this case, relied on a previous judgment in the K. Manjusri case. They emphasized that K. Manjusri established a clear principle: selection criteria cannot be changed after the interviews have been conducted. Why? Because such changes could unfairly affect both candidates' preparation and the evaluator's assessment approach.
So, essentially, changing the selection criteria midway could potentially disadvantage candidates who had already invested time and effort in preparing for the original criteria.
Precisely. The Supreme Court also had to consider another important precedent, the Subhash Chandra Marwah case, which dealt with the right to appointment from an existing select list.
How did the Supreme Court reconcile these two seemingly conflicting precedents?
The court clarified that while Marwah dealt with the right to appointment itself, Manjusri addressed the right to be placed in the select list. This distinction is crucial because Manjusri focused on preventing changes to selection criteria during the recruitment process that could unfairly impact the candidate's preparation and evaluation.
That's a very important distinction. So the Supreme Court in Tej Prakash Pathak case upheld the principle laid down in Manjusri, stating that changes to selection criteria after the process begins can be unfair and potentially violate the right to a fair recruitment process.
Absolutely. But the court also recognized that recruiting bodies need some flexibility in devising selection procedures. This is where the court's reasoning gets even more interesting.
Let's delve into the court's reasoning, Arjun.
The Supreme Court acknowledged that recruiting bodies have the authority to devise appropriate selection procedures, provided they adhere to existing rules and regulations. They emphasized the need for transparency, non-discrimination, and a rational connection between the procedures and the objectives of the recruitment.
So the court essentially struck a balance. While recruiting bodies have discretion, they must exercise it within the bounds of fairness and transparency. Could you give us an example to illustrate this?
Imagine a scenario where a public organization wants to recruit software engineers. They can introduce coding tests as part of the selection process if the tests are directly relevant to the skills required for the job. However, they cannot introduce a new selection criterion like height or weight, which has no bearing on the candidate's ability to perform the job.
That's a great analogy, Arjun. It highlights the importance of rationality and relevance in the selection process.
Now, another important issue that the court addressed was the binding nature of statutory rules governing recruitment. The court emphasized that these rules bind the recruiting body in both procedure and eligibility aspects. This means that the rules cannot be overridden by administrative instructions.
So statutory rules take precedence over administrative instructions.
Precisely. This is because statutory rules are passed by a legislature and have the force of law. They reflect considered policy decisions and cannot be circumvented through administrative actions.
This brings us to the question of rights of selected candidates. What did the court say about the status of candidates who are placed on the select list?
The court recognized that while being placed on a select list does not automatically guarantee an appointment, the state cannot arbitrarily deny appointments to candidates on the list when vacancies exist. This approach recognizes both administrative discretion and the need to protect legitimate expectations of selected candidates.
This sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is, Priya. The court essentially stated that the state must justify its decision if it chooses not to appoint candidates from the select list.
Now let's summarize the court's final decision in this case.
The Supreme Court upheld the principle that K. Manjusri laid down good law and that it is not in conflict with Subhash Chandra Marwaha as they dealt with different issues. They also reiterated that the recruitment process starts with the issuance of an advertisement and ends with the filling of vacancies.
And importantly, they emphasized that eligibility criteria cannot be changed midway through the process unless the rules or the advertisement allow for such changes.
Furthermore, they recognize that recruiting bodies can devise appropriate selection procedures as long as those procedures are transparent, non-discriminatory, and rationally connected to the recruitment objectives.
So, the court placed great emphasis on the principles of fairness, transparency, and rationality in the recruitment process.
Absolutely. They also reinforce the importance of statutory rules, which take precedence over administrative instructions.
Finally, they clarified that being on a select list does not guarantee an appointment, but the state cannot arbitrarily deny appointments to candidates on the list when vacancies exist.
This judgment is significant because it provides valuable guidance for recruiting bodies and candidates alike. It emphasizes the importance of adhering to established rules and procedures while recognizing the need for flexibility and fairness in the recruitment process.
It's a timely judgment that addresses the increasing concerns about fairness and transparency in public employment.
It also highlights the crucial role of the judiciary in ensuring that these principles are upheld and that recruitment processes are conducted in a manner that is fair and just.
And that wraps up our analysis of today's judgment. We hope you found our discussion informative and engaging.
Before we sign off, we'd like to remind our listeners once again to like, subscribe, and share our podcast. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing you daily updates on the most important legal decisions.
Absolutely. And don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another exciting episode. Until then, this is Priya Sharma.
And Arjun Gupta, signing off. Thanks for listening to the Ask Junior Daily Judgment podcast.